Why is it so hard for people, for the human race, to live happily, joyfully and lovingly together on this beautiful planet? Why are there so many wars, so much fight, and so much growing, it seems, polarization amongst groups, amongst people, amongst so many different people that are all still people, strange enough? Well, you see, I'm already confused by myself, so I need somebody with a big mind to talk to about this big issue. And I'm going to speak to Mpho Tutu van Furth. She is a writer, an activist, an artist, traveled and worked all over the world. She is a priest as well, and the daughter of Archbishop and Nobel Prize winner Desmond Tutu, with whom she wrote several books. One of them also about the art of forgiveness, which I think plays an important role in answering this question. What is between us and paradise?
So Mpho, I'm very happy you're here in this episode of Vrijdag in English with you. And we're having a small mission today. The only thing that you and I have to do is to solve the world's problems and create world peace and happiness for all of us forever. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Okay, great. Now, before we start with that, you always want to do something a quiet moment. Is that right?
I do. Yeah, I find that helpful. So I'm just going to invite you to take a breath with me. So just take a deep breath. And one more breath to allow us to arrive. The last breath, just to bring the intention of good conversation, good listening. Amen.
Amen. It really does change the focus from for me, it helps me to get out of my head and more into being present. Is that also for you the case?
Yeah, I think it kind of clears the space for me to be in the conversation that I'm in, and to set aside all of the other things that are either running through my head or
To create focus, clearness.
Yeah.
Great. Me too. Okay. I nearly want to stay quiet now. That's not very helpful when we want to have an interview. If you look at the world now, not only in Holland, but everywhere, do you think also that these times are in a way more challenging than they were, for the last decades? Do you see that? Are you worried?
Oh, I definitely see it. I think that at a time when so many countries just basically shut down, that the people who live on the margins of society are the ones who are the hardest hit by shutdowns. There isn't a cushion between them and the bottom.
This whole polarization, the whole feeling of that people are living more in their own bubbles, and they are disconnecting from a collective story. Is that also how you see it?
Yeah, also, but I mean, I think that we were on the way there anyway, in a sense, and that the pandemic has really kind of pointed out or thrown into a more sharp relief what was already happening. And
You
so,
mean then the difference between the people who are very well, well off, and the people who are not so well off, that has been, enlarged, that difference?
not only that, I mean, it has been enlarged, and you can look at the financial figures to see that, but also the other metrics of polarization. So whether you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask has become kind of a flashpoint in many societies. Whether or not you're risking going outside or not, who it is that you're hanging out with, whether you're kind of staying in your domestic unit, or you're going and visiting friends. All of those kinds of things have become choices that have the overlay of risky behaviors.
Sure.
And that people are making some of those choices based on their political stance, not merely on kind of practically thinking about, okay, well, does it make sense for me to do this thing, that thing, or the other? And how it is that we're taking care of people in our society, and who it is that we decide is worth taking care of.
So they come up, right? What kind of values we want to live by?
Right. So there are things that you say are important, but you say that they're important when it doesn't actually matter. But when the rubber hits the road, then you start to see what is actually important.
Yeah.
I mean, just kind of as a, for instance, kind of huge major bailout of KLM.
Yeah.
And then but frontline medical staff and nurses and those who are frontline workers are not really seeing any huge increase in salary or in payment, saying, okay, you're working in a danger zone, you should be getting danger pay for what you're doing. Yeah, and that's like, well, we can't afford to do that. Actually, you can afford to do that. It's just that you don't want to.
Yeah.
And I think that has been, kind of the way that we come at issues. We're seeing very, very clearly the difference in choice between what we want to do and what we can and we can't do. So, I mean, even thinking about things like, okay, last year was a huge year of environmental protests and young people really getting involved in protests against climate change and climate inaction, climate indifference. And the response was, well, yes, we're going to make a treaty so that by 2030, we will have reduced emissions by XYZ amount, because we couldn't possibly do any more than that. It would send our economies into a tailspin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, got it. And then, sort of the instance you have COVID, where those same decision makers are now seeing their lives being put at risk by the pandemic. All of a sudden, absolutely, we can shut down the economy, we can close down everything for a month, for 2 months, for whatever it is that it takes to get us into a place where we're no longer at that kind of risk. And so, I mean, basically what we're saying to our children is, you know what, you deal with it. The climate may, the planet may have blown up by the time you're of age to actually enjoy it, but we won't be here anymore, and so it's not our problem.
So what is the biggest threat here? Is that because these people are maybe not you per se, or maybe not me, or maybe you and me as well. What is this human tendency to do, what is this, because is this, could I call that selfishness, or could I call that short-term, just don't want to see, you know, take responsibility? What is happening here actually on the human level? Why do we take this kind of choices?
I think that you know, it's only in as a priest, we say that people have a professed religion. So what it is that they say that they believe, they have a professed system of faith, and then they have an operational system of faith. So, you know, we say we believe in love and health and you know, great climate and so on and so forth, but the way we act doesn't match up with what we say, and very often it's hard for us to see, you know, the difference between what we're saying and how we're acting. And so, and most of us aren't fiercely introspective enough to say, you know, is what I'm saying, how is what I'm saying lining up with what I'm doing? And where what I'm saying isn't lining up with what I'm doing, is it what I'm doing that needs to change, or is it what I'm saying that needs to change?
Yeah, because actually in between, you could actually wonder, what is in between the saying and the acting? I say I'm all for climate, la la la, but I still want to drive an old car actually, or you know, I want to fly a lot around the world, or, you know, I know these things by myself as well, those inner issues, you know?
And we have, there are actions that we will take that are not in alignment with our values. And the question is, can we pull ourselves to be more in alignment with our values, whether those are stated values or those are in, you know, felt values, that, you know, how is it that we pull ourselves into a place where we're more aligned with ourselves? Because we, you know, the being out of alignment, and I think, you know, we know that in the people who we really admire. I mean, they're the people who we admire because they look cute, or they, you know, they played so and so on TV, or they did, you know, and then they're the people who we really admire, and the people who we really admire are the people who give us the sense that their values and their actions are more often than not are aligned. So, you know, I mean, so one, you know, for instance, there's a kind of an affection for Pope Francis that, you know, reaches beyond the Roman Catholic Church. And part of the affection, right, and part of the affection for Pope Francis is this kind of sense that, oh, okay, this person really sounds as though, even when he doesn't kind of have the nail on the head, he really does sound as though what he says is on the way to an alignment with what he does, and that he's, you know, and I'm sure that there are people who disagree with him vehemently, but even the people who disagree with him vehemently disagree with him and still think that, you know, that this is somebody who
he's very
is worthy
close to his values there.
Right.
So
And I mean,
yeah, if we're
let's just sorry.
That's great with online talking.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, as you were talking, that isn't it so that as we are now, I'm not talking about every country, because but here in the Western world, where most of us lead quite comfortable life, it's we're not very trained to really live our thought values, our, like the values that we think we have. We're now basically, well, maybe not tested, but we sort of nearly have to learn how to practice those values, because now they become, when things, when the shit hits the fan, exactly, then it becomes much more relevant to actually execute them. Then it's, before that you can say you believe in stuff. Now you actually have to live those values. I think isn't that like where we are maybe in many cases in the world? We have to sort of redefine and find again what the values are that we actually want to live by, and not only in our heads but really in our lifestyles.
But that is crisis.
Yeah.
Crisis is always an invitation to examine, where your allegiances actually lie. Crisis is, you discover things about yourself in crisis that just do not come to the fore when you're living your normal, comfortable, everyday life. And because your normal, comfortable, everyday life is you fall into your habits and patterns, and you do the thing that you always do because you don't have to think about it. And crisis says, well, now you have to think about how consistent is your normal everyday life with the actual everyday life that you want to be living.
Yeah, and you have to change often, because often crisis, actually always, it also means you cannot go on the way you
yes
did. You got to sort of transform or change. You got to do something different, otherwise you keep getting those same results that are actually painful. Otherwise you wouldn't have got into the crisis probably in the first place, right?
Yes.
So this would be like, so in that way of thinking, you would say this is a global crisis, in fact, which pushes us to become more aware. And we're talking now about the pandemic, but I think also everything that lies under it already, which is conflictuous, that comes to arise basically in our awareness. So now we talked about the pandemic and how it's opening up things that were already not in harmony in our world, in our societies, and pushes us to look sharp again at our values and see, hey, what do we want to live by for our planet, for ourselves? When I ask you what is in between ourselves, what we do and what we think, if I make that question bigger, I would want to ask you, what is evil? What is in your thought or mind or heart? What is evil or the dark? Or
evil is what is actively opposed to love. Actively opposed to love. And love to me is not what you feel, it's what you do. Love is an action. It is robust. It has, it has heft to it.
Love is a robust action. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not hearts and roses and flowers, which is really nice. I have nothing against hearts and roses.
It sounds more like romance, though. Indeed.
Yes. So that's romance.
Yeah.
Love is more like the parent who knows that they have to get up and go to work at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, but the child has a nightmare at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the parent goes in and sits with the child until they can get back into a comfortable sleep, and then goes back to their own bed. And it's like you don't stop and go, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted.
Yeah, sleep by yourself, bye-bye. Yeah.
You just, shut up and leave me alone. Yeah, go, suck it mad out. As you would
Sometimes
say.
you got it. Okay, so that is love. So it's an act of empathy. Yeah? You think of a robust action and of
robust action, self-giving. So all of those things. So empathy, self-giving. That you're not. There's no calculation. So it's not as though because you did that for your child this night, tomorrow night they're going to not have a nightmare and let you sleep.
You don't calculate any
right. There's no
advantage for yourself. You're not thinking, oh, then I get this out of it, then I get that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just for outwards. So
right.
So then the evil, I mean, it's a big word. It's just really this energy which is in the word evil. But then the evil is the lack of that, basically, or the absence of that. So it's all that is not. Could you say this? So when we return back.
No, it's not just the absence of love, but it's the actual opposition to love. So when you act in opposition to love. So yeah, I mean, in that example, if instead of going and sitting and helping the child to hush down to sleep, you walk in and, kind of beat them up and, and tell them to, will you shut up? That is.
I can feel that immediately. That is where evil comes in. Yeah, it's really the heart.
Right. So then it's like I'm actively opposed to doing that thing that creates more harmonious
suffering. So this is an interesting thing that we're entering now. So it creates more harm and suffering, the evil, so to say. And the other action, this loving action, creates more love, actually, more togetherness, more connection, more wholeness. So could that be a guiding light to understand whether we, in small or big ways, are actually living our lives from love or, or a darker place or evil, so to say?
Yes. Yes, and the one piece of understanding is that sin and evil are twins, really. They hang out together. But sin is the system that thrives on evil and that builds and creates conditions for evil to thrive.
So you could say, could you explore, because sin is a word that for many people nowadays is not so active in their minds anymore. So sin, what is a sin? What could a sin be? Give an example of a sin, and then some egoistic, selfish act, for example. You do it once, and then the evil can sort of like thrive a little bit, and then you do it more and more, and how can I see that?
Yeah, I think that part of our problem with our conception of sin is that we've really kind of domesticated it. And so then, is it sinful for me to have another piece of chocolate cake?
Yeah.
No, it's probably not a good idea. But
not a sin.
But this is not it.
No.
The it is more systemic. And that's the problem is that because we have so domesticated our idea of sin, We have ignored the systems of sin that we allow
to happen in our society,
to proliferate in our society.
I love that, because I love the word domestication, because I think that we have domesticated also our values. Like, we're nice to ourselves, we meditate, we are nice to some people that we love, but we, you know, the whole, you know, we don't have a lot of focus on the goodness, you know, how to, you know, make the goodness in the world prosper. So tell me more about systematic sin. Tell me more about that. So what in our world now could you say, like, is the systematic sins that we have just let go out of hand, maybe, and that's that we, you know.
So I mean, I think, you know, most of the things that you attach ism to will end up being sin systems. So ageism is a sin system. Ageism. So I'm not willing to consider people over 55 for this.
They're just all throw them out.
Right. You know, so, you know, they're gone. They don't exist as people worthy of concern and consideration in my system. Sexism is a sin system. I'm not going to you know, I'm not going to allow this person to advance based on their gender and on no other criteria. Racism is a sin system. And, you know, and racism is one of those particularly where the conversation gets domesticated. It becomes an issue of, you know, how do I feel, as opposed to how is this system constructed to shut doors in people's faces, and that kind of, you know, so it's that kind of
with a feeling, you mean, like, I don't mean to be a racist, I like all black,
or I'm not a racist,
I'm not a racist,
you know, right? So racist isn't what you feel. It's not kind of, it's not a personal judgment on you. It is that you are participating in a system that awards rights and privileges on the basis of something that is irrelevant.
It's much more interesting to create a common ground to look and become aware of the system than to start calling names to each other and saying, like, well, you are a racist, and you are taking my privilege, taking my life away, or la 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 la. Good. That's another interview, by the way. It's very So we are. But it's very important. So that ism, all those isms in our minds, right? They're mind systems, sins, basically, because they're in our minds. They all create division, right, in our world. It creates us and them all the time, and the other person. So can you? I'll stop bothering you about this deep question, but why do we do that? Why do we do this? Why are we doing that? Why are we creating all the time and the us and the them, the me and the you? What is it in our human tapestry that something in us and more in some people and other people, but is it doing that?
Well, because it actually has some practical utility. One of the things that we're constantly doing in our mind is you know, building little short circuits for ourselves. So instead of I am going to engage in a long conversation with Fred so that I can figure out who she is, where she comes from, what is it that we have in common, what are we going to work on together, what, you know, do I want to work on anything with her, you know, like that whole long story. I'm going to just short circuit that and go, okay, Frey woman Dutch, yeah, I'm willing to talk with her further.
Yeah.
Or Frey woman Dutch, let me just keep walking, whichever it is.
Yeah.
And that's just, kind of a way of processing vast swathes of information really quickly. So, if you're in the wild, you look, you see budgie, tree, budgie, safe, I can keep going.
Yeah.
If you have to do the whole, tiger, how fast is it moving? Like, no, tiger, run. Or,
so it actually simplifies our life. It simplifies life. It makes it
right.
And as you explain it, I hear it merely as a biological function, to keep things clear and like, these are my crowd that I can work with, these not, it took to protect myself maybe against strange, weird stuff that I don't, that I might be threatening or might be different, or might be threatening to my status quo or my survival in some way, of some level. So is that so how you see it? Because then it means that we should overcome part of our biology, basically.
But we do that all the time. Overcoming our biology is something that we do all the time.
Yeah, like you mean it's not a hard.
So then what it becomes is that you do two things. Is this dangerous? Is this not dangerous? Okay, not dangerous. I can go forward. And you do your kind of little short circuit. Is it dangerous? And then you check yourself, okay, why did I, what about this? Is it really dangerous?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is it, or is this a figment of my imagination?
Exactly.
So for instance, I mean, as countless now studies have shown that people applying for a stage in a Dutch company are much more likely to get an interview if they have a Dutch sounding last name.
Last name, absolutely.
Right. And so then it is absolutely the task of the person doing that first human resources review to say, wait a minute, I looked at their name and I had already made a decision that I was going to put them in the out pile.
Yeah.
Let me take that back and check my assumptions again. And, why is it that I'm making that decision? Where what often happens, clearly what happens is they get put into the, reject pile and not reviewed.
Yeah.
As to why was that decision made?
So
it's those kinds of.
So it's about having awareness over that part of ourselves, not like not like maybe asking from ourselves that we don't have that, because it might be just a human thing to have all these tendencies. If I'm being mistreated by a guy with a beard, for example, my sister might warn me later on for a man with a beard somehow,
Right, exactly.
So it's just how it worked. But then to see that, so it demands from us a certain kind of awareness. And I think apart from that biological component, I would also say that it makes also people feel better to say like, okay, this other people, this group of Democrats, they don't really understand this, or these Republicans, or these white people, or these black people, or these women, or these men, I mean, we do it on many different levels, that we feel like we want to close up because we feel insecure or threatened, and we need to feel strong in the place that we are, and actually we don't, and we do that by building this mental tower. Sure. Sort of like, okay, but we are right because we are this and we are that, and you actually strengthen that because it's scared to open up in a way, or scared to lose your own identity that's been based upon all these beliefs. Can you follow that? Or
yes, I absolutely can follow that. And yet there's a book with an amazing title. It's called Courage to Heal. I haven't read the book, but I think that the title is amazing because I recognize that healing is scary. You know, to step out of your silo is scary, and to be intentional about stepping out of your silo and stepping into that place where you're not feeling comfortable and you're not at ease and you're not feeling powerful and strong and wonderful and you're feeling a little bit on shaky ground. But just to engage with a little bit of curiosity. So, okay, you come down on absolutely the opposite side of this issue from where I come down on the issue. I want to understand how it is that you got to where you are.
And is that the first step? Is that the first step? It sounds so beautiful what you're saying. That would be a first step for two people having very opposite ideas or frameworks or whatever, or maybe even engage in a certain kind of fight, small or big. That to have that first step is to have that curiosity, this willingness to learn basically from each other and hear each other's stories. That would be step one, right?
Right. Well, yeah, let's go with willingness to hear, not necessarily willingness to learn.
First hearing, just hearing, right?
No, I'm willing to hear.
I have an ear. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I hear you. That's all.
I'm willing to hear, okay. And you know, and I'm not trying to convert you, and I'm not, and you're not trying to convert me, but just you're willing to tell me how you arrived at the place that you're at. And I think that sometimes you find surprises in those conversations. I had one of my friends in the UK is an Afro British woman married to a white man, and her mother-in-law was living in an area of the city that had really undergone a huge transformation. It was the area she had grown up in, and she'd lived there all of her life. And there was a huge, you know, kind of influx of Indian and Pakistani people who had moved into the neighborhood. And so the mother-in-law was saying, you know, like, I don't like it around here anymore. The neighborhood has changed so much. And my friend's first reaction was, you know, like, oh, that, you know, oh, wow, that sounds like a really nasty, racist kind of statement. But then she said, oh, you know, well, what is it that you don't like? And she said, oh, yeah, all of the shops in the neighborhood have changed and I can't find my favorites.
Yeah.
There anymore I like and that I remember from my childhood. And you know, then that's a different conversation than just, you know, I don't like the people. No, it's not I don't like the people. It's that, you know, my girlhood is gone, and that's a, you know, that's something that you can come at, right? And that, you know, that's something you can come alongside, you know, you can come alongside her with that. And it's, yeah.
That takes time, because often we have a lot of short, you know, conversations or ideas, or also in the media, we're being fed by very short interviews by people or very short remarks. And we have all kinds of ideas immediately about that. And it only, you know, creates bigger barriers actually between people. So I really like that, the willingness to hear. I was way too fast, not yet to learn, might come later. Willingness. I know that you wrote a book with your dad about 4 steps of forgiveness. I think this is one of them. I remember this is one of the steps. This is the first step actually, to heal, or if, you know, when, so.
Telling the story.
Telling the story is how you framed that. Huh? Telling, if you're listening to each other, telling the story. Shall we go to the second? Because I think it's really helpful. Do you still, because the book has been written, you know, I think 6 years back or something, but could you still underwrite these 4 ways of healing, or maybe you develop them a little bit more?
So yeah, we begin with telling the story and then naming the hurt. So
is that number 2, naming the hurt?
Yeah, number 2 is naming the hurt. So you know, telling the story is, this is what happened. Naming the hurt is, this is how what happened impacted me, how it landed with me. And you know, those 2 steps are incredibly simple and
incredibly difficult, I would say.
And incredibly difficult.
Because specifically the second part, to be vulnerable. And I know this from my own coaching work, funny enough, that if you don't do the second step, like go back to where it really hurts. And you know, to be very close to that, to be there, and to, then it's very hard to actually really transform and heal. So I found it very interesting to find that you say this. So you gotta go and express from your vulnerable place how it hurt you, what it did with you, both sides.
Yeah. It's actually funny. I mean, you find in intimate relationships, intimate partner relationships, that, you know, you and Sweetie have an argument, and Sweetie says things that are not so sweet, and then you know, you're kind of beginning your healing journey, and you're like, okay, I really hated when you said blah 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 blah, and then Sweetie immediately says, oh, I'm sorry. But then Sweetie doesn't understand why you feel as though the conversation isn't finished, because you actually haven't been allowed to complete the process. So you haven't been able to name the hurt. And that leaves you kind of feeling as though there's something has been short-circuited that actually needed to be completed.
Yes. And to share that vulnerability and to own that, and then share, I mean, that's really, I think, very helpful in the process. And then what would be step number 3?
And then step number 3 is to offer forgiveness. So that's the place where you say, okay, I no longer reserve the right to exact revenge for what it was that you did. I'm not going to hold it against you. And that's different from, I'm not going to remember that it happened. Of course, I'm going to remember that it happened. But it does mean that that I don't make this thing that you had done my whole description of you.
That's well said, I think. So then forgiven, but that could also be in between. I'm just thinking also, when we translate this back to our societies, and from tomorrow on, all people in the world who have something against each other or whatever, the Jews and the Palestinians in America, and they're all going to sit together and practice this. From both sides, I would say, right? They can all express their story, they can all express their hurt. And then the third step would be that they actually, because it sounds simple, but I think it's not near like the grace of God. I know I can say it to you because you're more with God than I already am, you know, like, that sort of like you create softness and love, let's come through you, right? And to let that pain from the second phase, to let that go away, or allow that to leave you, or allow that to let go.
But not allow that not to no longer be what defines your relationships.
Yes.
So the fourth step is reconciliation. But reconciliation doesn't mean, okay, now we've reset and we're going back to the relationship that we had before. Reconciliation means that we're starting a relationship on a new foundation. And the new foundation is a foundation that says that what happened before could never happen again, because we are different. We're different with regard to each other. We're in so much a different place. And I mean, the reality is that in any argument, any conflict, there are two sides. And if it's a good, nice, heated argument, then, you know, who's right and who's wrong, and who's hurting and who's inflicting the hurt, and who's absorbing the hurt, really kind of crisscross all the way through the argument. And so who needs forgiveness and who needs to forgive also crisscross all the way through the argument. And so this, you know, we live a lot with thinking that we're supposed to settle scores. We can't. No, you know, you can't give me back what was taken from me by the argument we had. I can't give you back what was taken from you. And so what we can decide is that we want to do things differently from here on out.
Yeah, because that creates a very different feeling also inside ourselves, right? Once we've done this with somebody else, not like, okay, now I gotta forgive this person, but it creates a whole different feeling, I think, in how we move and how we live. When we the last thing I really want to talk a little bit with you about is that when we talk about this world, and it would be great if we want to build in this conversation a strategy for world peace and world happiness, and everybody in the world together tomorrow, with any person they have a problem with, not only in the domestic sense, but I think specifically also in a bigger sense, you know, like groups of people that are in fights in our world, that are opening up to each other. I want to explore one last very important thing, that when we create new common values that stem from love and not from evil, as we've, you know, defined it just now, how can our relationship with God help us? And I ask that because you are very you know, known, obviously, being reverent to your, you know, idea, definition, feeling, experience of God. In Dutchland, where I live, God is not so very sexy. I mean, there are obviously people who have a close connection to God, but for many people, it's, you know, it's a memory of like a prison, that they were imprisoned in a Christian beliefs that they don't like anymore, or it's a threat from new religions coming from outside. There's obviously a lot of spirituality emerging in our country, but it is very different again. It's a funny, complex, messy situation, I think, when it concerns God in specifically Holland, I would say, and maybe more Western worlds. How do you see the connection with the divine or God, however you want to frame it, as being helpful to us in this recreation of the common values in our world?
Wow. Okay.
I told you.
Yeah, that's okay. So, I mean, I think kind of as a starting point is that vision of God, or that conception of who God is, and what is it that what does God want from us? And I think that very often in our religious systems, we live with a God who's quite oppressive.
Yeah.
And I can't believe in that flavor of a God. I can't believe in a God whose desire is for us to live lives of misery,
guilt and feeling wrong
and right, that you know, that we're constantly oppressed by a sense of guilt, and that when you know that it's a God who's kind of waiting to thwack us on the back of the head every time we kind of step out of line. That doesn't, yeah, that's not the God I know.
No.
That's not the God of whom I have any experience.
What is the God that you know?
Well, the God that I know is a God of love. God is love, which means that in my understanding, what I do for other people, and for other sentient beings and our planet, is not because I'm scared that God is going to thump me if I don't do it, but because God has been so generous to me, that I'm just passing on a little bit of what I got.
There you are.
Sorry.
Yeah,
yes,
no problem.
yeah.
You're passing on what you've got, you're saying. Yeah?
Right. So yeah. So
and how do you think that, because we call it God now, eh? So is that, you say God is love. So when we come, you said this nice thing, when you have these values, like how do I live? What am I doing here on this planet? Well, you know, how do I want to live my life? If I am discerning in myself all the time answers to that, and I'm trying to follow what love says to me, yeah, or maybe you know, then you might say, I'm following God, you know. Not that we need, I mean, some people can, I'm sure that you know also yourself, I know you have an atheist wife, so I know you're not at all rigid in any way about it, because we can call God also divine, you know, like it's for me about the inner connection with that you have an inner, which is the same time outer. I mean, this is really semantic problematic to talk about this, but like a guideline, or not like a standard, but like an inner world in which you all the time you check basically what's happening, instead of you're just out there following desires or living comfortably or la 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 la. But that's like you check and recheck all the time. Why am I living like this? How am I living? From where am I living? Could you I think that without that, and it's bigger than yourself most times, doesn't come only from the head, like I have to do this or I should do this. So without that sort of like spiritual guide, or whatever you want to call it, God, or I think it's really hard for our future generations in this completely crazy world to live, you know, also with all the bubbles and media and fake news and the deep fake. If we don't have an inner guide somehow, you know, that we can turn to, what do we live by?
So we all have an inner guide. The inner guide is there. Whether or not we listen to the inner guide is really what is the difference between people who live lives of holiness and piety and those who don't. And just remember that inner guide can be drowned out. So, you know, that if you're constantly having input from the media and your friends, and you know, it's like there's constant input from everywhere, then you can't hear what the inner guide is saying.
Yeah.
And you just, you latch onto the thing that sounds the loudest.
Yeah.
And the inner guide is typically quite quiet. And
it's a high energy.
Yeah. It doesn't, the inner guide tends not to yell at you a whole lot. And so it's that you have to make a decision to listen, and to listen for that, so that you know what your next right action is, your next right step is, your next right response is. Because your inner guide is never trying to drown out what's going on outside you.
So actually, to be open to that inner guide. There's a fact. When we started the interview, you were quiet. You could also say we sort of like make space, get open to, to have the inner guide, walking along with us through the conversation, basically, not only being like still having a text message to do or but to really. So could you say that then it would be you actually, and if we put it in an advice for the weekend, because we always like to give a weekend takeaway for our viewers and listeners, take more moments to open up to your inner guide, to listen to your,
or even one moment. Start with one. And there's, you'll notice when you breathe that you'll inhale, and then there's a slight pause before you exhale, and a slight pause before your breath turns around again to the inhalation. And all of those little slight pause spaces, you can extend that slight pause just a little to give you a moment to listen. So it doesn't even have to be, okay, I'm going to go sit down on my cushion for 80 minutes and say Om. Just kind of slowing yourself down just a little bit, allows time for the guide to show up and make themselves heard.
Yeah, the guide God, or however you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
So to summarize, this has been a rough ride, Mpho. Wow. To summarize, because the openness to that inside guide, so as we call it now, right, asks from us to slow down. But I think also the openness to the other person, which is we talked about as well, also demands from us to slow down and take time to listen. So I think this interview is a lot about learning how to listen, funny enough, to the other person, and be open to the other person, however we find it maybe confusing or whatever, and also being open and to listen to this inner world from which we can define our own, really, what do we really feel about this, and find out these values that are so necessary to develop again in the world we live in, and as a beacon in this crazy world with all this stuff going on. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. Nice summary. Thank you.
So we did find a recipe to create.
There you are. Well, that's what happens when you set an intention.
Exactly. Well, that's then the last. That would be the last great advice. Set an intention for your life, and make it stem from a very beautiful, good, soul-guided value, right?
Yeah.
Mpho. Now, everybody that's hearing and now in this interview and made it till the end, I can talk for hours on with you about this wonderful life. Your wisdom is is fantastic, and I really hope for you and the world that we're going to hear and see and read more from that to inspire you and lead us on the path to love.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you so very much.
You. COVID hugs to you.
COVID hugs back. Amen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.